grey area discussions. Those situations that aren't black and white, where there's at least two sides to an issue, and each side is determined that theirs is the only way. But more often than not, the reality lies somewhere between the two. The conflict between junior doctors and the health secretary has been making lots of news over the past few months. The health secretary, Jeremy Hunt, the man with perhaps the most unfortunate name when asking or making controversial or unpopular decisions, is trying to impose some changes onto the junior doctors' contracts. Basically to increase the basic pay by 13.5% on average, but cut back on some of the unsociable hours payments. Like day hours on a Saturday will be paid at a normal rate, while extra premiums that are being offered for night and the rest of the weekend will be slightly lower than current, and they're changing the way that some of the pay increases will be linked. Understandably, the junior doctors aren't very happy about this because, to be fair, a lot of the time it feels like they're being overworked with really, really long hours for, not great pay. And, the ability to, if you've got to do out-of-hours stuff, getting paid extra, obviously that's sort of how you survive and justify, really long, inconvenient hours. The problem is, although I understand and agree with the motives behind the actions, I'm not really sure I agree with the means. I'm never entirely convinced by when any sort of public-facing service goes on strike, because it's like you're holding, the general public in the crossfire. They are not involved in the decision, but they are affected by the conflict, and I always feel a bit iffy about that. But even up until now, they've had some strikes where it's only been non-emergency care that's been affected. Just routine operations and just some of the day-to-day stuff. Except I've seen people whose lives have been turned around by those sorts of operations, and they've had to wait ages to be scheduled. Maybe they've been rescheduled once or twice, and once it's finally sorted, it makes a hell of a difference. Their life might not have been in danger, but their quality of life was massively increased by having these operations done. And if they'd had to have them postponed an additional time because of industrial action, I'm not really convinced that for them it would have been worth it, because they'd be being made to wait for something that's really not their fault, but it would be in some cases affecting the ability to work, affecting the amount of pain that they're in, all those sorts of things. Except this time it's going to affect emergency areas as well. And okay, yes, there will still be nurses, midwives, healthcare assistants, consultants, staff doctors. Those will still be there, but it's the junior doctors who do a lot of the in the cases they do a lot of things that the consultants don't need to do. So the consultants will be needing to be pulled away from other things or try to do all umpteen things at once. And I don't know, it just feels like they're holding the public hostage, and I'm not convinced about that. On the other hand, I don't really think that the proposed changes are necessarily great. I understand why some of those changes are being made. You know, that I do actually think that there needs to be more of a closer to a 7-day health service all across the board, not just hospitals. You know, there needs to be more stuff in evenings and weekends at your GP surgery. There needs to be, you know, closer to a weekday level of care on the weekends. I do think that needs to happen. The problem is trying to do it on the cheap isn't the right way to go about it. Having an unpopular decision and the BMA, the British Medical Association, you know, trying to go into talks and all that kind of thing, and then just Jeremy Hunt going, nope, it's my way or nothing, and not wanting to compromise at all. I don't agree with that. On the other hand, strikes when potentially lives will be at risk, I really don't agree with that either. Jeremy Hunt not backing down, much as I don't agree with the decision he's defending, I can't disagree with him not stepping down to those sort of bullying tactics, because I don't think what the junior doctors are doing is right. I said, I think all the reasons are right, the motives are right, but the means, I really, you know, the end doesn't justify the means. I really don't think it does in this case, because there is the potential that people might die over these strikes, and if they do, people will always ask the question, could this have been prevented if the people were at work? And taking it on faith that someone might have died for a greater cause that's a hell of a lot to ask for grieving loved ones. On the other hand, letting everything just go ahead and let Jeremy Hunt have his way, and I'm not convinced that's, like I said, it's a grey area, but I don't agree with either side really, not completely. And although I support what the junior doctors are fighting for, I'm not sure about the strikes. I don't think it's the right idea, because it's basically it's bullying tactics, trying to say, look, unless you start listening to what we've got to say, people might get hurt, people might die. That's bullying, that's extortion, that's, I don't want to call it terrorism because it isn't, because that's like, it's way far away from that, but it still to me feels at least like baby steps on that sort of road. You know, it's, the scale is way different, but it's, I don't know, there's just something about it that just rings wrong. You know, it's like, you know, we are going to hold public lives over your head to make you make the right decision, Mr. Hunt. I'm not convinced. I don't think strike action is the right thing in this case. Problem is, strike action is, at least here in the UK, it's seen as an important right, and it is a useful last-ditch attempt, you know, when trying to negotiate with employers who really don't seem to want to move from, you know, making some decisions that could be very detrimental to the workers. But it's like, again, it's one of those where there isn't a third option. It's either put up and shut up, or down tools and go on strike. There isn't a third option, but sometimes neither of those options are viable. Because I don't think the changes are good, and I don't think the strike is good, and I think that if anything, if there are any real medical disasters during these strikes, it's going to erode the trust that people have in doctors and in the NHS, and it's not going to help matters. I mean, if everything goes fine, everything's just a little bit more chaotic than normal, and wow, that's a day we could have gone without, at least nobody died, that would be one thing. But if anybody dies, it's gonna ask questions, and ultimately it's going to be the people who chose not to go in to work who will be the most responsible, not the people whose actions drive them to that. Because otherwise it's, if the doctors then turned and said, well, this could have been avoided if, that's very, very close to the whole look at what you made me do when someone does something violent because they're having a row with someone. It's like, this didn't have to happen, I didn't have to hurt you, look at what you made me do. And this is going to be dangerously close to that. Or at least starting to walk in the same direction. And I don't know. It's a difficult situation. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, when you get down to it, I think Jeremy Hunt's being a bit of an arsehole. He has decided what he's going to do, and he's not going to bloody listen. And to hell with the consequences. So, I mean, yeah, again, if anything happens during these strikes, he will be far from blameless. He won't be directly responsible, but he will be involved in the decision-making process, and he will have driven people to this. But even then, I still don't, I don't think that these strikes are the right way forward. But in a way, I think that Jeremy Hunt is going to have to back down, because the decision really does lie with him right now. From what I can tell, the junior doctors, they feel like their backs are to the wall. There are people, wanting to leave the profession, or at least leave the UK, because they don't like the way things go. That is not a healthy working environment. That is not a good situation. So, if these decisions make that worse, that is not right. And, if he's the guy in charge, he needs to be making better decisions. And the thing is, this is one of those situations where it is a grey area. That means there has to be compromise. That means both sides have to be willing to give and take. But that means both sides have to be willing to give and take. And although it sounds like the junior doctors have a point past which they don't want to move, it seems like, from Jeremy Hunt's side, he just doesn't want to move at all. He doesn't even want to try to compromise. So although I think both sides need to reach out further, his side doesn't feel like it's reaching out at all. Because he's decided this is the way it must be, and I'm not going to listen, and maybe there isn't a lot of money to kind of throw in more support, but immediately kind of going, yeah, but we're going to suddenly transition into something that, however necessary, we can't afford to properly compensate you for it. And yeah, you might feel like you're being overworked, but there's a good chance that you might feel like you're being treated even worse. It's messy. Like all of these grey areas, it's messy. Because there isn't a simple answer. But I don't think I don't think the strikes are the right answer, especially because I don't think Jeremy Hunt's going to change his mind. I think it's his responsibility to change his mind, but I don't think he's going to. I really don't. He's decided the way things will have to be, and he is, as it were, calling the junior doctor's bluff. And if they give in, it might weaken their position, but if they don't give in, people's lives will be at stake. Yeah, sometimes with these grey areas, there's no good guys. There's people with better motives and people who are being stupid, but both sides come out looking dirty. And unfortunately, both sides have allowed this situation to reach that point. They've let it escalate to where both sides look bad. And right now, I agree with what the junior doctors are fighting for, but depending on what goes on with the strike, I might not be happy with the way they've gone about it, which might make it hard for me to want to side with them any further. At the moment, Jeremy Hunt's coming out of this looking like the biggest arsehole in the argument, but things may change in 2 days' time. And in a way, that's going to be part of the problem. I don't know, I'm rambling because, like I said, it's a grey area. There are no easy answers. There is no simple answer. It's not just a case of keep things where they are, but it's also not just a case of pay everybody more. But there has to be a compromise. There has to be somewhere between the two. I think that all-out strike action is being too heavy-handed, but I think trying to impose changes that nobody wants is also being too heavy-handed. To be honest, I think both sides need to get back around the debating table and basically grow the hell up. And with that, see ya.